Welcome to the Freelance Journalism Podcast. I'm Catherine Reynolds Lewis, and I'm thrilled to be here with my colleague Shernay Williams to talk about her interview with Jenny Splitter, editor-in-chief of Sentient, the only nonprofit newsroom reporting on factory farms and alternatives to the status quo for our food. I thought she seemed like such a warm person and really great to be edited by. Shernay, what stood out to you about this conversation?
Absolutely. I agree. She was very relatable and she's a former freelancer. So she understands the freelance life, which is really helpful when you're working with an editor. And I was really interested in the topics that they cover in general because I'm intrigued by our food system. Everyone may not be, but really she has lots of opportunities for people who are interested in things. And we're talking about, how our climate impacts our food system, additives in foods. So there's really a lot there for freelancers to work with.
Absolutely, I agree. And here's the episode.
Welcome, welcome. We are grateful that you are here. My name is Shernay Williams. I have the pleasure of serving on the leadership team for the Institute for Independent Journalists, who puts on this podcast. And our goal is to help ensure the financial and emotional sustainability of freelancers of color. So once again, thank you for joining us. And of course, I want to introduce our guest for today, Jenny Splitter, an award-winning journalist and the editor-in-chief of the Sentient, the only nonprofit newsroom reporting on factory farms and alternatives to the status quo. And I'm really excited to have this conversation as someone who's been thinking about the food that I eat, where it comes from, and all those things. But prior to joining Sentient, she was a freelance journalist reporting for outlets that include The Guardian, Vox, The Washington Post. She lives in DC with her husband, 2 kids, and pets. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So before we jump into your publication, I'd love to hear more about you and your journey to journalism, because I hear it's pretty interesting.
Well, like a lot of lawyers in DC, I was not happy as a lawyer. It's like very common story. And I always wanted to be a writer, but kind of not a journalist. I definitely didn't have that in mind. But I started writing for a blog that no longer exists called Grounded Parents. And the topic, the focus of the website was evidence-based topics related to parenting, vaccines, breastfeeding, what to feed your kids, birth, all that stuff. And it was a really great experience. And a few of us there started freelancing. And I sort of was like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing you could do. So I just started pitching. At that point, it was more like reported op-eds. I had never done any real reporting at that point, but I kind of started to work that into my more opinion pieces. And I really liked the reporting more than the opinion writing and more than like the personal essay type stuff, which is great. For me, I loved reporting. I love talking to people and like you learn so much. And I loved talking to scientists and I loved reporting on food. So food and kind of food science were the things which it's not anything I studied before, but for whatever reason, I think just because there was so much for me to learn, and there's always something new, even now there's always like a new wrinkle, some little nuance of like, this is how this crop grows versus this crop. And I love all those little details. And I kept, I was freelancing. So I did some science journalism, health journalism, but food and climate and the intersection of food and climate were like the things that I love the most. And there was not, and still isn't really enough coverage on that topic. So that's kind of what led me to Sentient. I met the executive director who also and Sentient's whole, mission is really having more reporting on factory farming. When I was a freelancer, I basically got interested there were a couple of reports that came out around 2018, 2019 on essentially meat or beef's impact on climate emissions. And it just was this really big, it seemed like a really important topic that not a lot of people knew about. And I got really obsessed with it and just, how deforestation and how we kind of store why forests are so important and all other natural landscapes, because those are kind of keeping the carbon in the ground. And then as agriculture expands, especially beef, it all gets released, but also you kind of lose this opportunity to store carbon forever. So it's kind of like a double whammy that people don't necessarily know about. And I'm not a scientist, but I guess just trying to get the details right, really, I became obsessed with that. So getting really interested in that topic and wanting to report on it led me to do a few really cool freelance pieces. And then that led me to the executive director of Sentient, who was looking for a managing editor at that time. And then the rest is kind of history, basically. But yeah, it was definitely a long kind of, I did a lot of different things as a freelancer, like many freelancers do. Did some fact checking, did different kinds of reporting. So I learned a lot along the way, and I feel really lucky I can just focus on the thing I'm really passionate about now. But I learned a lot as a freelancer, and the editors who really took time with me, I think, as a freelancer, that like I still think back about those lessons now that I'm an editor. So it's interesting, and when people take the time to do that, it's so like I just have so much appreciation for that.
Yeah, so now it's really like full circle for you.
Yeah.
So how has this changed the way that you eat, right? Now, like learning so much about factory farming, has it changed how you eat?
It has, although it's kind of funny because so I went vegan at a certain point, and it was mostly because I kept reading that this was like the most effective diet, for the environment. And I sort of was like, okay, I'll just try it. And then also, I guess there is something about me really liking a challenge because I love cooking. I had always cooked with meat, though. I wasn't even vegetarian. So it was hard to learn. It's not hard to just sort of go vegan with like basic substitutes, but I really wanted to learn how to cook good vegan food. So that took me a really long time. And yeah, I just kind of stuck with it. But it is kind of funny that like along the way, it did influence how I eat, but I almost now being in this space and reporting on that, we tried to like, you don't have to be vegan to work at Sentient. And it really is more, there's a bigger picture of like the systemic things that need to change, but also what people eat does play a role. So, but not everyone is going to want to cook, not everyone enjoys cooking. There's plenty of household chores I don't enjoy doing, so no judgment if you don't like cooking, but yeah, it's more about kind of the evidence and like the research suggesting that reducing meat can have is really actually necessary as part of this like bigger set of solutions to address climate emissions from food. And there are other impacts too that we report on: water pollution, animal welfare, workers, slaughterhouse workers, a whole range of impacts. But so what an individual eats is kind of just one part of that, but it's also an opportunity if that's something you can come back on. Great. So we kind of with our reporting we don't want to sort of give people here's everything wrong and here's everything you should be doing, but more like, you're curious about these topics to kind of, report on a pace that's reasonable for people. Because I know when I started learning about these things, if someone just, sort of gave me a 4-hour long lecture about everything, that would not spark curiosity,
overwhelming,
right?
Yeah.
So we try to not sort of be heavy-handed about these things, but just more like tell stories, tell people the information we don't think is reported on widely enough. That's our approach.
Mm-hmm. More solutions journalism, it seems.
We do both. We do both. Yeah, we do accountability journalism and we do some solutions. But I think it's more, like a kind of combination of systems and corporations and policymakers, and then also sort of dietary change and what that looks like and what's hard about it, because it is hard. It's not really just a question of evidence. Otherwise, everyone would just go, oh, okay, I'll just, check that box and go vegan. But for a lot of people, they don't want to do that. They like meat. We're really interested in what the evidence is, and also where the challenges are. So a big part of our reporting is when we report on a solution, part of it is about what is working and what is not working. And, if something is extremely hard to deploy as a solution, that's part of the story. And that's something that it's an ongoing conversation, I think, with readers. I mean, as it is for all of us, it's just trying to figure out kind of what climate action looks like, both individually and in a community and globally, and all the, these different kind of zooming out and zooming in perspectives.
And I think that's really helpful for people. Like you said, it can be overwhelming to hear all the things that you should be doing. And so, yeah, that's very interesting. And I understand that you're the only outlet that's solely focused on factory farming as well. So standing out in this sea of media outlets that we have.
Yeah, I mean, we're the only, yes, we're the only not kind of nonprofit news outlet only focused on this topic. There are Vox has Future Perfect that does a lot of focus, other things, but also factory farming is in there. And then, of course, a lot of other outlets might be, focused on food systems, or they're a bigger news outlet and they might have someone on the ag beat, although a lot of news outlets don't have reporters who are on the ag beat anymore at the national level. So we try to fill that gap with our reporting, with objective reporting that, can hopefully trickle up to bigger news outlets and just fill sort of the void, because it is a complicated topic and not everyone has been closely following the research. So we try to kind of fill that void and, report on new research, report on how communities are deploying different kind of their own alternatives to sort of this, what I call the status quo, because it's a little complicated to explain. Like, some of the terms are more academic and wonky. So I've been just saying alternatives to the status quo, that could be anything. Could be Proposition 12 in California, banned the use of cage. Well, they restricted the amount of space that a gestating pig has, essentially, for just give them a little more room. So it's a very modest animal welfare improvement, but that's the kind of thing we like to report on. well, what does that look like? Can other states do that? How hard would that be? What does that mean for farmers? Are there farmers who actually are interested in even if they're out of state, complying with that because they might earn a little more selling in California? And that's actually one of the things that we've uncovered in our reporting. So we get into these very niche topics, and sometimes controversial, because some farmers are very opposed to any kind of animal welfare improvements and some actually embrace them. So we try to talk to everybody and make sure the reporting is objective and fact checked.
Well, the people listening to this podcast are likely freelancers. So I have to ask if you work with freelancers and what that process is like, if you do.
We do work with freelancers. We have a bigger staff now, so we're working with fewer than we did when I started. And obviously, but we still work with freelancers all the time. The biggest thing that I think often is one thing that's really great is if people get what we are all about when they pitch us, but if they do, and they sometimes are these really, niche stories that I would have niche, even though we're a niche, beat outlet, there might be stories that I'm not aware of. I learned something, and that's the greatest. But yeah, we get pitches all the time. And assuming a pitch is, within our kind of wheelhouse, we accept it. And our freelance charter, which is the contract, is on our site. So we try to be as transparent as possible about rates. We have the lowest possible on our site, but we go up from there. We say that, and also the terms of the contract. And also, people, one thing I've tried to do over the years, since we can't pay, zillions of dollars, is to say, okay, if someone say is really passionate about a story, but they're this is below my rate, one thing I'll do is both try to get it up to what I can in my budget, and also say, okay, maybe it's just one round of edits or something like that. I try to, kind of do what I can with freelancers, so it's not and we pay relatively quickly. That's one thing I can kind of offer as a benefit. So I try to see what I can do with what I have as a small news outlet to be appealing.
When we appreciate that, the transparency, having the website there, and I believe the email address is there as well for people. So that is very convenient. So it looks like the range like starts at 300 on the low end, you said, for word pieces, 1,000 word pieces.
Yeah, and it could even be a little bit like 800 words would be like the shortest, but could do that. Also, people have photos, we can then pay a little more. And then we typically pay between 400 and 500, I'd say. And we can do with that budget, we could do 2 a month. So, or I could sort of save it up and spend more. I kind of am still getting used to what makes sense for us and what's the best for freelancers. Is it better to work with more people for the rate for around 450, or is it better to pay more and fewer freelancers? I think I've kind of have been leaning towards more just being able to work with sort of earlier career folks, and that's what I can offer them, and then just try to make it as simple a process as possible. Again, like whatever the things I can do to make it an easier process, that's what I could do. I remember having to fill out a bazillion forms for bigger outlets. So I'll try to say, there's just, a simple process, one person in accounts payable who gets you enrolled in the app we use, which is Gusto. So I try to do what I can to make it appealing, I guess. With, again, a relatively limited budget.
That's why we need freelancers to advance, because they know how it was for them, how it is for freelancers. So yes, that is so important. And even the liability, I see that you hold freelancers harmless because your insurance covers, and that can be a huge issue, especially if freelancers are working on investigative pieces. So that's helpful as well.
Yes, that was interesting because I assumed it was going to be this whole very arduous, complicated thing to get that, but it turns out our insurance covers it and it was fine. So that's great. I was very happy to learn that. And we also have an in-house counsel now who is also our director of operations. We didn't intend to bring on a lawyer, but it actually does help in these situations. And we have fact checking and everything. Like, I try to make sure, obviously we want to be accurate and protect ourselves, but I also don't want a freelancer to be sort of hung out to dry. So we try to do what we can there also.
Absolutely. And you mentioned having a desire to work with some young writers or young journalists. And so that was going to be a question I had as well. So how much expertise would a freelancer need to have in order to pitch to you? How important is that?
It's not. I've definitely worked with like a full range of journalists. So I think it's less about how experienced they are and more, if they have a really unique story or some reporting. I guess I'm also happy to go if someone is really passionate and like has a good idea. I'm happy to sort of, if they're really, really new and say, like we can sort of work out something where if they can record on their phone, like they don't have to necessarily have the Otter subscription, we could transcribe it and they give it back. There's little things like that we can do. And we also have, I should say, we've started a Slack community for journalists on this beat. It's called the Food and Farming Journalism Network. And that is someplace early career folks can go and learn from each other. And we have webinars. So we actually, part of Sentient's mission is to cultivate more reporters to report on this beat. Or even just if you're in say you're a climate reporter and you mostly focus on energy, just so that you know kind of the basics of food and climate, or the basics of, what it looks like on an industrial chicken farm, so that if you happen to have some reporting or a story where there's an opportunity to have some of this sort of critical information, I would say, that most people who aren't reporting on food wouldn't know. That's kind of our hope, that we can give you a little bit of information that you can take with you that might be able to be part of, and just make kind of deeper reporting, if it's something that touches on food in any way. Because sometimes people don't know how much the food system, I think, influences, like, say, greenhouse gas emissions. Like, people sort of have this vague idea, like, oh, cows are bad.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
trying to give people a little more information so that, maybe they're a food writer and it could be something that they work into, eating a little more plants or something like that.
And I'm sure that leads to better pitches for you all as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of pitch, what would you say is the ideal pitch as far as the length and the structure, how people get in touch, anything that you know for a fact really works well?
I am a fan of a shorter pitch. I feel like a lot of people want to have this huge, long thing. And I don't know, when I pitched, I didn't do that. And no one ever really complained. It didn't seem to really make a difference because editors don't have a lot of time. So I like a sort of, couple line takeaway. And I think the key, and one thing that's often missing though, is sort of, I will find out this, which I know is tough because you're asking freelance journalists to do some pre-reporting. But the problem is I have to know there's a there. So I think it's just like figuring out kind of, here's what I know so far. And the crux of the story is this. Just like, honestly, it could be a few lines. And then I usually like bullet points that are just like, here are the sources, here's the reporting. Just here's the research I'm relying on. That's great. And then it's just very easy for me to get a sense of it really quickly. And there are examples of past work, but I actually don't yes, you should always include those, and, that's easy to do, but I don't go scour and analyze. Like, I'm just looking at the pitch. So, and I've had people say, like, I'm new, here's something I wrote before, even if it was a blog post, that's fine too. I mean, I think, and that when I got started as a freelancer, that's what I did. And, editors will get a sense that you can write from your pitch. So I think, it's okay to do that.
Very true. Any examples that stand out to you of freelance pitches or stories that were successful?
Yeah, we've had several. One that immediately comes to mind because it was very shocking, a little gross, so hopefully people won't get upset with me. But I had no idea that, in fact, when I got the pitch, I was like, that's not true. And I actually report on the meat industry, so I should know better. But it's like horse blood is part of pork production. Right. I was like, oh, that seems outlandish. But it turns out there are these horse blood farms in a few different countries, and it's used in fertility medicine too. It's essentially just like this hormone booster. And that's how pork production is able to be so prolific, essentially, because you just keep pigs pregnant over and over and over again. Fun fact you probably didn't want to know. So a freelancer brought that to us, and yeah, it was quite a detailed story, and it did very well. It was, I think, linked in some other reporting by Vox. We've had one of our freelance reporters who is now kind of helping manage our food and farming journalism network. She has freelanced with us a few times. One was about a ban on cultivated or lab grown meat in Florida. I think she's from Florida. So she was actually talking to a lot of different sources there, which that was one of our earlier stories. We have a lot more on the ground reporting now, but anytime you can do that, I should say that's actually great for us, especially if it's someplace. So we have someone right now who's in Iowa and someone in North Carolina. We also have someone in Florida, but West Coast folks who want to do reporting on factory farms or anything that's kind of like a, alternative to that Water use, that's huge. Like, please email me. And in the West, it doesn't have to just be California. Like, the West generally, we don't have a lot of freelance, or we don't have staff folks there. What we do have one person, but he is more of our sort of explainers, policy writer. So if you're someone who wants to report on the ground there, please email me, because I'm always looking for folks there.
That's a good note. And you mentioned the freelance story had an international element. So do you only focus on US stories for the most part, or you also incorporate some international?
So it's most of our audience is US based. So most stories are US based. However, the food system's global, especially when you're looking at a commodity like meat and feed crops, soy, corn. So, and food is imported, obviously exported. So if there's an angle, or that kind of ties it back to the US, or it's a massive company like JBS, that's something we're interested in. One story we did that it was, I often have to get US readers like kind of centered a little bit back to them so they care.
Yeah.
So often it's sort of like, shrimp farms in India, and that's actually being, imported by US eaters. And here's what it looks like. And here's the standards around antibiotic use and that kind of thing. So we do a lot of stories like that. Or sometimes it's just, here's what's working in another country. And could it work in the US? If not, why not? Kind of just exploring what's working in other places in the world.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Lately.
Helpful to know. And how far out do you work? So if we have a pitch for a holiday, I don't know how an example would be necessarily off the top of my head, but something that is seasonal, maybe. How far in advance should we be pitching you?
That's a good question. Yeah, we don't. Well, okay, if there is sort of like an end of the year type story, we do try to plan those out in advance. We don't do a ton of seasonal reporting, or seasonal stories, I guess I should say. But yeah, those could be maybe a month or two out. But we actually, in fact, I'm trying to get us more of a lead time, because we just brought on 2 new editors. So for a long time, it was kind of, we had a leaner team at the editor level. So now we have a bit more, staffing, so we can kind of plan out further. But usually I would say turnaround with a freelancer is maybe a month at longest. It's usually actually fairly quick, but we tend to work with some of the same freelancers over and over again. I guess if we were doing something more investigative which we haven't really, well, it's not, I don't know if we've really worked with a freelancer for like a big investigative project. That would be probably something that would take longer. If we need to get legal checks, that might be a few months out. If you have something in the works, or if you have an idea, it's like, I want to do some complicated, data project, that I would say, yeah, it would be good to reach out a few months at least in advance.
Great. Well, that was very helpful, I think, for people who are considering pitching. Anything else that you want them to know about working with you, or just the publication in general?
I think just that, if you have an idea for something and you care a lot about it, just email me. And, if it's something that might require work, if you're early career, and if it ties to our mission, which is factory farming, I'm happy to kind of go back and forth with folks. And I do sometimes, like, here's the angle that could work for us. So, I basically, that's kind of what I can also help sort of pay it forward with freelancers. Don't be afraid to reach out with something if it's a bit of a rough idea, as long as there's a kernel of sort of facts and reporting in there, and it ties to our mission. I try my best. And now that I have more editors, they can help answer emails too. So yeah, we try to give feedback, see if we can work with you. Because right now we don't get too many freelancer pitches, I think, because we are still such a small outlet. So the people who know us do
now.
pitch. I'm here for it, as long as it's factory farms. Like, the biggest thing that happens is people are like, I have this reporting around tomato plants or something like that. It's like, well, it's not what we do. But yeah, as long as it's on, what we cover, and we have examples on our Pitch Me page. I guess that's another thing to say.
Yes.
So look at those, because I picked those intentionally. Those are really good examples of what we're looking for. And as long as you're in that wheelhouse, like, I'm happy to go back and forth with you.
Great. And we'll make sure to have a link to that in the show notes for everyone. And it has your information on that page as well.
Yes. And you can always just send me an email, jenny@sentientmedia.org. So I still answer my emails or try.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you. It's great to chat.
Great chatting with you. And thank you for joining. See you on the next one.
The Freelance Journalism Podcast is a production of the Institute for Independent Journalists. Our mission is the emotional and financial sustainability of freelancers of color. Learn more about our work at theiij.com and use the code POD10 for a discount on our annual conference and other events open for registration now. That's POD number 10. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, or like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or both. You can find our free webinars and other offerings on YouTube. And your recommendation and sharing with friends is the greatest compliment and helps us discover new listeners. Thanks for listening.